At all times we had in our minds that we had to defend our country from the enemy in the south. Nothing strange about that. There were no doubt about it, or lack of will. It was not at all in our minds that someone might say that they did not want to go.
Soldiers, Denmark is at war. I trust you will do your best for king and country.
On April 9, 1940, at 4 a.m., the German armed forces crossed the border into southern Jutland in Denmark. At the same time, airborne troops were thrown into Aalborg Airport and at an important bridge in the southern part of Zealand. Disguised as cargo vessels, troop transport ships sail without opposition to their targets. The landing in the capital Copenhagen takes place without any resistance. The Danish government and the king were gathered at the royal palace. It was surrounded by the German forces, and outside they could hear the royal guard fighting the Germans. At 6 o'clock, they decided to capitulate. The Danish army was told to stop any resistance, since further opposition would cause large airstrikes on the capital. This serious threat had been announced by the German envoy in Denmark to the government. The German Air Force was already in the airspace over the capital, so the threat was very real and present. But the order for the army to surrender did not arrive at the army units in southern Jutland. The Germans had interrupted the telephone and telegraph lines. Here in the center of the city, one of the most intense and bloodiest combats were to take place. The Germans met resistance they did not expect. A small company and their cannon were to cause havoc in the German advance, inflicting costly human and material loss. The street has not changed much in the last 80 years. And the houses look almost like that day, in April 1940. Only a small bronze plate on the wall of this house is still telling about the event. Here on the corner of Dukan Street, the 2nd Regiment's cannon company took a stand against an overwhelming German force coming from the south. Private Berthelsen, member of the cannon company, recalls the events of April 9th.
The alarm went off. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning. My group, under the command of the Cornet Vesterby, went into position at the corner off Dukan Street, where we had a fairly long firing range to the south. We had preferred to have been further south on the road, where it was possible to cut road trees down that could have blocked the road. There was no time to get breakfast, but we were allowed to drink coffee at one of the street residents. My group was invited in to the Butcher family, where we had a nice morning meal. Here we had some time to talk about what awaited us. We then heard that there was some unrest in the street, so we grabbed our helmets and crashed to our cannon. But it was our forces from the south, moving north up to Vejle, to go into position there. We talked to them and were told that there had been fought in the south, and that some Danish soldiers had fallen, but the Germans had suffered severe losses.
This photograph was taken shortly before the company made contact with the enemy. Children on their way to school, and some civilians are curiously watching the company of 2nd Regiment and their cannon. The 37mm anti-tank cannon was designed in Sweden in the early 1930s. Originally only for Swedish use, it was exported to several countries during the 1930s, of which several bought a license to produce it themselves. Among them the Danish army. The cannon was very effective against light tanks and armored cars. It had an effective firing range at 4,000 meters with an anti-tank grenade. The maximum firing range was 6,500 meters with a high explosive grenade used against infantry. A well-trained team could fire 12 shots per minute. The 37mm cannon were ready to prove its worth. as it had done in the Spanish Civil War, and in the Finnish Winter War, against Russian tanks. The German force that came against them from the south was exactly what the cannon was built to meet. The panzers were two different types. The Panzer II had 14 mm of slightly sloped steel armor on the sides, front, and back, with 10 mm of armor on the top and bottom. Most tank versions of the Panzer II were armed with a 2 cm L55 autocannon, and was capable of firing at a rate of 600 rounds per minute. The Panzer II also had a 7.92 mm machine gun, mounted coaxially with the main gun. The Panzer had a crew of 3, and had a range of 200 km on a full tank. It had a top speed of 40 km an hour. SDKFZ 222, an armored car, was armed with a 2 cm L55 autocannon and a 7.92 mm machine gun. It had a crew of 3. The range was 300 km on a full tank. The top speed was 80 km on road and 40 to 50 km off-road. It lacked top protection, other than a wire designed to allow grenades to roll off. It had a very thin armor, and was for the same reason an easy prey for anti-tank weapons. The German force was now only minutes away. Because of the losses inflicted on the light reconnaissance units in the early morning hours, they now had moved their tanks in front of the advance.
A sergeant of the recon group, who had been sent south on a motorcycle, came back from his reconnaissance. He stopped at our cannon and told us that the Germans were right on his heels, and that he had been under fire. Cornet Vesterby commanded us in our seats by the cannon, ready for battle. And almost at the same time, he gave us orders to open fire on a light tank that had appeared on the road ahead. It already had taken us under heavy fire. Vesterby was struck by the first burst from the tank guns, and he was mortally wounded, but was still able to crawl into cover in the house on the opposite corner. We hit the tank and made it silent. But meanwhile other tanks showed up and opened fire at us with everything they had of machine guns. We fired back and hit another tank. We were in a terrible bullets rain. It was almost like being under a roof in hail weather. 313 was hit in the leg and the projectile broke it, and at the same time he was hit in the right shoulder. We told him to crawl in cover. By the last fire from the tanks, I had fallen off the seat of the cannon and was hit in the foot by a bullet passing through. I had only just gotten back into my cannon position when a bullet passed through my field bottle. It looked peculiar as the water flowed out of the 2 holes it had produced. 305 Hansen, who had been slightly wounded, was hit by another bullet, but he again fired a shot at the next tank and hit the track of it. The tank had been rather troublesome to us. It was silent. At the same time, 308 was hit in the left arm and in the right eye, presumably by splinters from the shield on the cannon. It looked ugly, and we yelled at him to seek cover. He was almost blind and completely incapacitated. At the same time 305 was struck by a bullet rain that ripped his abdomen open, and he fell off his legs and covered himself. I was now alone. I was about to load the cannon when there was a loud bang, and it turned out that it was a bullet that had gone through the cannon's shield, and it had torn a large hole right where my head had been. If I hadn't then been down to pick up a grenade. The fire from the German tanks was now getting closer, and a bullet went through my right thigh, and another ripped my hand up. I was now trying to get over to the other side of the cannon to shoot, but it was impossible. Then I was hit in the right elbow, crushing the joint. I was cut off to get in coverage, and a 20mm grenade that hit me in the right shoulder put a stop to get a shot off. So I started to look around a bit and discovered at once a little bullet that sent out a flame. I kicked it away. It was a harmless tracer projectile. The enemy fire was still very strong, and I looked out under the cannon's shield and saw a tank coming down towards me with high speed, shooting with all their guns. I became frightened to realize that the tank was about to run me over. I have to admit that I was scared, because I thought that after all, I had graciously survived the fight till that moment. But once again I was very lucky, because at the same moment, the gun hit the tank, and turned it at a sharp angle, and actually lifted the cannon up above me. The tank was so close that it touched my arm. In the same moment, I was surrounded by German soldiers pointing at me with their machine guns. But they quickly became aware that they didn't get much trouble with me anymore. So they shouted at sanitary soldiers to take care of me.
The intense combat was over. Private Berthelsen was brought into the house on the opposite side of the street, where also his fellow soldiers were hospitalized by the residents of the house. Despite the fact that he was severely wounded, he still insisted on that his brothers in arms were brought to the local hospital nearby before himself. Even outnumbered and against an overwhelming force, Berthelsen and his fellow soldiers had fought beyond for the king and the country.
Kornetten råbte fyr og blev i det samme ramt af en salve fra de tyske maskingeværer. Og vi afgav et skud og ramte en kampvogn. 308 blev ramt i øjet, og jeg råbte til ham, at han skulle søge dækning over bag ved huset derovre. Og på det tidspunkt blev 305 ramt i maven af en serie skud. Jeg blev så imidlertid ramt i højre lår og i højre skulder af en 20 mm granat. Og der faldt jeg ned på mellem kanonens lavetben, og var så ukampdygtig. Når jeg så kampvognene komme for fuld tryk herned imod os, der lød forfærdeligt bra, og kanonen blev løftet hen over mig. Og så var kampen for så vidt forbi for mit vedkommende.
The result of the combat was, all 5 members of the company were either injured or dead. Private 308. Bond. Seriously wounded. Private 108. O.A. Hansen. Seriously wounded. Private 391. B.L. Berthelsen. Seriously wounded. Private 305. H.C. Hansen. Killed in action. Cornet F.M. Westerby. Killed in action. The combined casualties on April 9, 1940, were 16 Danish soldiers killed, and 23 wounded. The Germans have never revealed the losses, but it's estimated to be up to 50 killed, and 65 wounded. 12 armored cars were destroyed, and 3 tanks in Haderslev, by the 2nd Regiment's Cannon Company. Berthelsen, the last member of the Cannon Company, passed away in 2007. None of the Danish soldiers who fought on April 9, 1940, did ever receive an award or any recognition for their efforts defending their country.